YouTube star right here.
Yeah, okay.
You might get 5 minutes. Yep. All right.
Well, I don't know if somebody's going to be doing this class independent study with David Collins this summer. I can't remember who it was. So there might be more. We're not offering it this summer this year. And so Richard was teaching. So I'm going to let them use these videos, so they're going to actually listen to me talk about them. And then make
20 tests.
Yeah. You might get a few.
All right. So types test risk assessment procedures, test controls, substantive test and transactions, test of details of balances. It's a nice.
Okay, let's slow down. Go back to that. You guys know what all these things are? We've mentioned them before. The steps that you've got to do, you need to know all these, okay, inside and out. Okay? Risk assessment procedures happen at the planning phase of the audit, right? You're going to do risk assessment. Then the basic areas you're going to have, testing controls, and then so you're going to do a preliminary evaluation of controls, right, guys? I talked about that. You're going to do tests of those controls, and then do a basically final evaluation of the controls after you're done doing those tests. And you can still revise it if you do substantive testing, you find the controls are better or worse than you thought they were, right? But based on your test, what it is. So that's a category. And then we're going to do substantive tests of transactions. And of course, the transactions all are built up. Substantive means substantiating ending balances, right? Okay. So we're doing substantive tests of transactions because the transactions all add up to the ending balances. Everybody knows this, right? Okay. And then test the details of the balances are actually looking at the ending balance, receivables, inventory, whatever. Okay. That's all we're talking about here. And this is a big deal. You do this in every single area of the audit. All right. Those of you who've been out there working, you really think about this stuff, and that's basically the sequence they go in, although the substantive test of transactions and the test of details of the balances can happen at the same time. But typically, you'll do the test of controls before you do the other ones. Why? You're going to use the results of your test of controls to do what? Yeah, minimize your substantive testing to the extent possible. You're not going to set your scope for substantive testing as the sample sizes. You're not going to set them until you know how good your controls are. If your controls are really good, what happens to the size of the samples of the substantive test? Goes down. That's it. Okay? If the controls are horrible, there you go. Okay? We already knew that. Okay?
So what's the difference between the third and fourth?
The test of transactions is actually recording the transaction. And a lot of that will relate more to the income statement, although obviously the balance sheet, you have a beginning balance and you do all the debits and credits. The debits and credits are the transactions, and you have your ending balance. But on the balance sheet, we tend to use more tests of details of balances, right? Versus on the income statement, you start with zero. And you have a whole bunch of transactions accumulated, right? Revenues, expense accounts. And so the test of transactions are really nice in that area. Does that make sense? The transaction is the actual, it's not the debit credit, it's the transaction behind the debit credit. Make sense? So when you test controls over sales, for instance, you test how the sales are recorded. Debit accounts receivable or debit cash and credit sales, right? And then debit cash and credit accounts receivable. So when you're doing that cycle, that would be the test of the controls looking at that. As you do the test of the controls, that's also giving you some of the substantive tests of transactions because the controls are controlling transactions, right? But then you expand it to doing a larger sample for the test of transactions, right? So it's kind of a trade-off. You can either do more substantive tests of transactions or more tests of details of balances, depending on the type of environment you're in. If the controls are better, what would be better? Maybe tests of transactions. If you're not going to rely on the controls very much, tests of transactions don't work as well, unless they're really big ones, really major ones. Like you bought a piece of land, for instance. I could actually audit that transaction, couldn't I? The depth of the land, credit, mortgage payable, credit cash. Got the idea? So that kind of answers the distinction. Okay? So it's the summation of your test of controls, your substantive test of transactions, and your substantive tests. Oh, by the way, it's substantive test of details of balance. Okay? They're both substantive. I looked at it, you can see they look at it. But they're both substantive. Last two are. Does that work? Substantiating balance. Okay.
Here's further audit procedures in the audit risk model. It is on page 4 of 3, and then under that, they start going into each of the areas. So in test of controls, they, for evidence and making inquiries of appropriate client personnel, examining documents, records, and reports, observe control-related activities, and reperform client procedures. They said the amount of additional evidence required for test controls depends on two things: the extent of evidence obtained in gaining the understanding of internal control, and then the planned reduction in control risk.
Okay, let's think about this model with you guys. So what was the basic model of detection? This audit risk model. What was the basic model? We want the audit risk to be at a certain level, right? And what three factors go into that? Detection risk, control risk, and inherent risk. Okay, what's inherent risk? That's the risk that there will be a material misstatement in the financial statements in the absence of internal controls and in the absence of doing a audit. Right? Detection. Got it? Okay, so that's inherent risk. So an audit can be inherently more or less risky. What can we do about the inherent risk? Can we change the, no, we can't change the inherent risk, it's what it is. So you just try to get a feeling for what the inherent risk is, okay? Then that inherent risk times the control risk is what? It's the risk of material misstatement before you do any detection work, right? Before you do any audit, right? Who controls the internal controls? Of course, the client does, right? Control risk is what? The risk that an internal control will not either prevent or find and correct, right? Preventing controls and correcting controls, right? The risk that those internal controls will not either prevent or stop, or find and correct, right? Material errors that occur because of the inherent risk. So you can reduce the risk of material misstatement by what happens. By what happens. You can put in good internal controls, right? So inherent risk times the control risk gets you down a ways. And then how do you determine what your planned detection risk is? Whatever my audit risk is, right? I will have to have a certain level of planned detection risk based on what I need to get my audit risk to the appropriate level. So let's put some numbers in. Let's say inherent risk is 50%. And let's say control risk is 30%. And you would like to have a 10% risk of there being a material mistake in the statements you don't get. Right? Firms usually either use 5 or 10 as a rule of thumb. We don't really have these numbers, it's all judgment anymore. So if you put 10, right, on audit risk, we did this before, but now that we're actually working on it on, something a little more substantive, testing substantive. What if you have this? I want audit risk to be 10%. If I think the inherent risk, what did I say, 50%? 50% chance that there would be a material misstatement in the financial statements with no control controls. Okay? If I think the control risk, their controls are decent, but not great. Their controls are pretty good. I think there's still a 30% chance that I say. What am I down to so far? 15%, right? So probability work, right? 50% chance of mistake, 30% chance you won't find a mistake, you get a 15% chance of a mistake continuing all the way through. I want this to be 10. What do I have to have for detection risk? What's detection risk? The risk that my auditing procedures, and which procedures are we talking about, by the way? Substantive ones, right? Because we're testing these controls right here to make sure that that's really the number, right? Okay? And then over here on the detection risk, what we're trying to do is this low enough so that I get back to the 10%. What does this number have to be? I'm at 15, I want that to be 10. What does it have to be? This is an easy on it. What does it have to be? 0.5 times 0.3 times some number is 0.1. What is it? Yeah, 67%. 66 and 2/3%. That's a fairly good job. I didn't have to do much detection work. Got the idea? What if we have this situation? If I want this to be 5, right? I want to take less risk as a firm. What has to happen over here? 33 to 30. Got the idea? Okay. What happens if I have horrible controls? Oh my. 5%, this just went down to 17%. Got the idea? It's going to be a much tougher audit. And more expensive. How do you get detection risk down? Do a whole bunch of study procedures, right? I look at every single transaction, and I look at every single balance. I probably can have a good audit, even though this is high and this is high, right? But of course, nobody can afford that. Got it? Somebody's going to see that now. There's kind of equations up there, all semesters. And somebody will see that now. I think we're really crazy. Okay, good. Now break it down into these. What do we have up here? The test controls, test what?
And then I just covered the test controls and then substantive test transactions.
Mm-hmm.
They are used to determine whether all 6 transactions related audit objectives have been satisfied for each class of transactions, which, if you don't remember, are occurrence, completeness, accuracy, summarizing, classification, timing, and then analytical procedures involve comparisons of reported amounts to expectations developed by the auditor.
So what's an analytic procedure? Is that a substantive test or is that a test of control? What is it? You can't test controls with analytic procedures because you're doing a reasonableness test. I asked, is analytic procedures in this environment a test of controls or a substantive test? It's substantive because what you're doing is you're estimating a balance using an analytical procedure. On test of controls, you're seeing whether or not they follow control. So you'd be observing somebody, right, do it, right, that kind of thing, okay, with test of controls. So, no, it's impossible. Right? Because what you're doing is you're getting an estimate of a value, okay, the reasonableness of it, testing the reasonableness of a value with an analytical procedure. Versus testing controls is, are they doing that particular procedure or not, right? Observing whether they're doing it, looking at evidence that they did it or not. Okay, where else could you use analytical procedures? You could use analytical procedures 3 different ways.
The beginning and the end.
Yeah, beginning, end, and middle. That's it, right? At the beginning, it would be in the planning phase to determine which accounts you look at, right? Remember that? At the end, it is to see if there's something that now that you've made a bunch of journal entries and changed things, is there something that you changed that now needs to be investigated, right? Are the relationships no longer logical, right? Still out of whack. Did you make a bunch of journal entries? Did you go, right? So at the end, now the accounts that you thought were okay might not be okay. Do you identify things? You know, or did you just miss something? But in the middle, when you're doing this work here, is part of the substantive testing. It is a quick and dirty way to do substantive testing. Now, if the internal controls are pretty good and all the procedures are okay, it's a substantive test. Because you think the number's probably okay, but I just want to be sure. So I'll do an estimate using an analytic procedure. Make sense? If that's not true, if my test of controls, first, if my design of controls isn't all that good, and or my test of the controls find out that they're not very good, right? They're not following them. They're not using them, or they're not designed very well in the first place, then what am I going to need to do? Probably substantive test of transactions and a lot of tests of the details of balance, which are also substantive tests. Okay? So that kind of does.
Yeah. The 2 most important purposes of analytical procedures, kind of what he said, indicate the possible statements of financial statements and provide substantive evidence. And then for test of details of balances, it focuses on the ending general ledger balances for both balance sheet and income statement accounts. The primary emphasis in most tests of details of balances is on the balance sheet.
More so. Yeah. And all that multiplied together equals what? And we're done there? Or added together, rather. Added together equals what? Sufficient, appropriate, evidential matter to do what? Sufficient to do what? Yeah, providing justify your. That's it. Okay. So as soon as we have enough evidence to write and do an opinion, we're done. Until you have enough evidence to write an opinion, you're not done.
A major part of these procedures are done to obtain an understanding of internal control.
Can you imagine that as you obtain the understanding of internal control, you start getting a feeling of how much risk there is? Inherent risk, control risk, you know, what does the business do? How do they operate, right? So, what controls do you need because of the inherent risk in the environment of the business? And yeah, that's just common sense.
And role of all audit tests in the sales and collection cycle. So this is on page 404, and it kind of shows you where these tests affect the areas of sales, accounts receivable, and then they just initial them for like APs, analytical procedures. TDB is test of details of balances. And substantive test of transactions, STOT. So it just shows you where those tests are.
This chart is kind of hard to read, but it's really pretty good. You know, sales starts with nothing, right? A zero beginning balance, close the books. And then what might you do? The ending balance could be audited by analytical procedures and or audited by test the details of the balance, right? Could they also use tested details? That is tested deals. Could they also use tested transactions? Yeah, sure. Okay. I didn't include it in there, but you could. Okay. Under the sales transactions, they show it there, right? Substantive tested transactions. Test internal control. First, to determine the level, and then audited by analytical procedures. So the ending balances tend to be audited more by what? Either analytical procedures or, more likely, details of balances. Yeah. And then the transactions happening rely upon internal controls, right? Make sure the transactions recorded right, hopefully. And not that the ending balance doesn't also rely on that, of course it does. Okay? And then also audit what? The transactions themselves, right? Substantive test of transactions. Okay? You can also use analytic procedures for reasonableness of the total amount that got recorded as a transaction. Okay. Good.
So select the appropriate types of audit tests. So this chart is on page 406, relationships between further audit procedures and evidence. It summarizes how auditors respond to the risk of material misstatements identified through risk assessment procedures by using the 4 types of further audit procedures to obtain audit assurance in the audit of sales and collection cycle. And then you have your further audit procedures on the left and your types of evidence.
This is going to be exactly the same for every cycle. What are the things that you're going to be testing for you guys? The type of evidence across what are you testing? You know these by heart by now? Oh, by the way, on one of these exams, I am going to probably not use multiple choice and just make the whole exam be on, give me definitions and stuff. What are these things? How does this thing work, right? And it's the same stuff every chapter after chapter after chapter. So could you recite for me the types of evidence that they have listed up there? What are the types of evidence? There's a question. What are they? Physical examination, confirmation, inspection, observation, inquiries of the client, re-performance analytic procedures, and recalculation. Which types of evidence, just in general, are stronger and weaker? Give me the categories for being stronger and weaker. Physical examination is stronger. Why? We did it ourselves, right? We did it ourselves. Anything I do myself is really pretty strong, huh? What's almost as strong? Confirmation, where I'm getting it from an independent third party and getting it directly to me, so I'm kind of doing it myself. What's on the weak end of the scale? Inquire the client, they just give some sort of representation to you, they explain it to you. We still have situations where we do that, but it's got weak evidence, right? Okay, in between, what's stronger and what's weaker? Well, the re-performance, we did it ourselves, so that's pretty strong too. It's almost as though we did the estimate ourselves, right? Okay, or physical examination or something, or observation ourselves, right? So yeah, re-performance is pretty good. Okay. What else do we have? We have documents that are prepared by the client that they keep, right? And then we have documents prepared by the client that leave the client, go to an independent third party, and come back to the client. Which one do you think are better? If it goes out to an independent third party and comes back to you, like a check, right? Or a sales invoice, perhaps, that went through the hands of the customer and back to you. You got the idea? Is better. Okay? How about documents that we just do internally? We prepare it ourselves, and we keep it, time cards. You know, so good, huh? Not as good evidence. Okay? You got to be handled by somebody else. Okay, so you can group these sort of by that, can't you? Okay, right? And then, what are we trying to do with these procedures? He's going to have that up here too. What's the other piece going to be? We're using these procedures to determine what? We're collecting evidence that the financial statements fairly present the position of the company, the results of its operations, the period ending and cash flows, the period ending and cash flow. Okay, but what? What do we mean? What are the things that we are auditing for? What are the client representations that lead to our audit objectives? That's the real critical stuff here, you guys. What are those? You already said what they were. Let's go through them. What are they, guys? What are the things that we are collecting evidence about? That the accounts and the disclosures and the numbers and everything are all what? They show up in the balance sheet and income statement. They're what? What things? Completeness. Okay, we got accuracy, right? Okay. Classification. Cut off. Okay. What else we got? We got occurrence or existence, right? Do those? Well, that's sort of included with clerical accuracy. What else? Presentation and disclosure. Did we get them all?
Yeah, I think so.
I think we got them all now. Okay? Those should be at the top of your head, right? Okay? These types of evidence and then what you're trying to accomplish. Okay? The auditor the client representation of the auditor objective. Okay, good. That's pretty good.
So audit assurance at different levels of internal control effectiveness. There's a trade-off between test controls and substantive tests. If tests and controls support the control risk assessment plan, detection risk in the audit risk model is increased, and planned substantive tests can therefore be reduced. And then that was also mentioned, if you go to the PowerPoint, that's also in the notes underneath this chart as well. Then they must always perform test controls and an audit of internal control over financial reporting.
So if it's a public company, what are we going to do? You must test the controls. You have to give an opinion on the controls, right? What about if it's a non-public company? You don't have to. Would you still want to obtain an understanding of the controls? Yes. Would you test them? If what? It might save you time because you test the controls and therefore you can reduce the substantive tests and your overall time in the audit would be less. You save audit fee for the client, right? You still have a good audit. We're always constantly trying to do that, by the way. It's a strange business, isn't it? Right? You don't want to charge somebody for something you shouldn't do, right? Okay, so you just collect the amount of evidence you need and you take the most efficient method to getting there, right? Getting enough evidence. So if it's a non-public company, private company, how would you decide whether you're going to test the controls? Because if they're designed well, and you test them and they're following them, it's going to be a cheaper audit, right? It's going to be a more efficient audit, and still be an effective audit. I think you reduce your substantive test. And you guys that have been out there know that confirmations are real expensive, right? Physical examinations are real expensive. Right? The substantive procedures are really expensive, right? Okay. So, wouldn't you rather rely on controls and then do an analytic procedure maybe? Sure. So on a private company, what do you do? If the controls are good by design, what do you probably do? Test them. What if they're poor by design? Why would you test them to find out that indeed they're poor? You're wasting your time because you're not going to rely on them anyway. So then you wouldn't test them at all. In a public company, would you still test them? Yes. To verify that they're not any good, and then they have to fix them, or you can't give them an opinion on internal controls, right? The opinion on internal controls, is that talking about the past or the future? The future. We care about internal controls going into the future. What's in the financial statements now is already there, right? We care about the controls for going into the future when you're doing an audit of internal control. When you're doing the audit of the financial statements, what's that about? What happened in the past or what's happening in the future? What happened in the past. Okay, so you get that distinction? For a private company, we don't have to do the audit of the internal controls. We're just testing them to see whether or not we can rely on them. Everybody good with that? I've said that a couple of times, but it takes a while to get it to ingrained, I think. Okay, cool.
And if you're curious about the cost of various tests, on page 407 at the bottom, it lists in order from least to increasing cost the different tests. So, as you mentioned, substantive tests are the most expensive.
Yeah.
And that's at the bottom of 407.
Mm-hmm. They also list right above that the types of evidence we were just talking about, right?
Yep.
Good. All goes together, huh?
So understanding how information technology affects audit testing. So the impacts of auditing standards provide guidance for auditors of entities that transmit, process, maintain, and assess significant information electronically. In the book, it notes that these standards recognize that when significant amount of audit evidence exists in electronic form, it may not be practical or possible to reduce detection risk to an acceptable level by performing a substantive test. So computer-assisted audit techniques may be used to test automated controls or data. Reports produced by IT may be used to test the effectiveness on IT general controls. Because of the inherent consistency of IT process, the auditor may be able to reduce the extent of testing of an automated control. And then it talks about how when these programs you need to make sure that if a program does change, the proper authority change the program, because that goes with consistency. So if the program does change, you need to make sure it's done by proper authorities.
I have a question for you guys. Now that David is teaching the 425 as a systems class, do we really need to do the systems chapter? Or could we just skip that chapter?
So, chapter
The
12.
one that Ryan did?
Yeah.
I think it's a good refresher. I don't remember.
Yeah.
You didn't remember until after read it? So probably a good, because they're doing it here again, right? Only in a small way here.
Yeah, this is.
And as
I
we
think
go
this is the
through,
last
they do it in
slide.
a small way. I mean, it's just, you know, we get a little bit in each one. You think we should leave the chapter in?
Well,
I mean, rep.
had 425.
Well, that's true.
I'm
We haven't
taking
had it
right
yet.
now at the same time as taking that.
I was just thinking it's the first chapter.
Yeah.
And what a lot of people do is they just don't cover all the chapters on all the different cycles, but I hate to do that. Notice I did, you're reading 2 a day as we go along, because you're reading the same thing over and over, it's just on another cycle. And my idea is it's really good to look at it though, and it's really good to work some problems related to it, even though it's going to be the same thing. These are real important chapters because this is going to be what we do the rest of the way. You know, just pull everything in and think about it from another standpoint. So, okay, well, thanks for the feedback. That's not helpful at all, but okay, I got it. Yeah. No, but that's good feedback. So if it's good review, let's do it. Yeah. Because students are always bored with everything we do, of course. So, yeah.
Understand the concept of evidence mix and how it should be varied in different circumstances. So in order to understand this chart, you need to look at page 411 because it gives you the analysis of audit 1, audit 2, audit 3, audit 4.
Am I the only one that this drives crazy?
So because I was looking at it, I was like, well, how are we going to know what audit 1 is? Well, you basically only need to read like the first 2 sentences of each one. So the client, for audit 1, the client is a large company with sophisticated internal controls and low inherent risk. Therefore, the auditor performs extensive tests of controls and relies heavily on the client's internal controls to reduce substantive tests. For audit 2, the company is a medium-sized with some controls and a few inherent risks. And then audit 3, the company is a medium-sized but has few effective controls and significant inherent risk.
That must be a public or private company, the third. Right. Even the audit 2, what is the problem? Should be public, but I don't know. I think I want to extend a pretty extensive amount of testing. Anytime I'm going to give an opinion on controls, you know. So I think if it was public, maybe that test of controls would be pretty extensive in every case. Right? Probably. Yeah.
audit 4, the original plan on the audit was to follow the approach used in audit 2. However, the auditor likely found extensive controlled test deviations and significant misstatements while performing substantive tests of transactions and substantive analytical procedures.
So what just happened was you tested controls and you found out they weren't very good after all. Now you have an expensive audit, right? Because if you test controls with hindsight, you wish you had. Oh well. So this is motivation. When you work on smaller clients, convince the client they really want to tell you what they do. Don't tell me what you think I want to hear. Because everybody wants to say, I follow that control, I follow that control, I follow that control. And if they're not really, you're going to go test whether they are or not. And then you're going to find out they're not. And now you've done test the controls, which you're going to charge them for. Because they basically kind of didn't intentionally lie to you, but kind of made it look better than it was. Human nature. And then you're going to charge them for doing the substantive test too, right? Test the details, test the balance. Right? So, you're better off to tell you the truth, I think. And so you develop a good relationship with your clients. That's, like I'm trying to help you. Right? So, yeah. Did you guys understand that going across? Have you read this yet? In audit 1, what do we have? Extensive test of controls, and the controls turn out to be really good. What do we do when we get the substantive test of transactions? Small amount. Why would they do a lot of analytical procedures? Because they're cheap. They're cheap substantive tests, right? And we're relying on those controls. And then why wouldn't we have much details of balances? Because we don't need to. Inexpensive audit, right? Because they have good internal controls. Okay, the second one, what happens? Medium test of controls, less expensive, but then what? More expensive on the test of transactions, and really, I don't know if I'd have E on analytic procedures, but maybe, right? I'd certainly have a lot of tests of details of balances, though. Maybe the E would have to be on the test of details of balances. It just depends. Were there weak controls on the third one? What is going to happen to you? Look at the substantive test of transactions, the substantive test of details of balances. Huge cost audit, right? Very expensive audit because they have weak internal controls. I don't bother to test them, right? Says no testing, why bother? Okay, got the idea? That's how they're all going to work. Okay, and then in the fourth one, you got a surprise. You test the controls you shouldn't have, and now you're just dead meat. You have to work hard in every area. Which fits on. Good.
Design and audit program. Part 1, test of controls and substantive test of transactions, analytical procedures, test of details and balances.
Why did they put the substantive test of transactions together with the test of controls? By the way, for you guys, part 3 is substantive test of details and balances. I wish this author would do that. They used to, I don't know why it's not. Okay? They're both substantive, right? They just want to be clear in part 1 that the test of transactions is substantive. The test of details and balances is still substantiated balance. Okay, why do they put test of controls and substantive test of transactions together? Yeah, why? Yes. If I do a walkthrough of a sales transaction from beginning to end, I have tested one transaction. Right? So you might do walkthroughs on a few, but you'll keep the record of that. You guys do any of this? Right? You keep the record of that, and that's one of your tests of the transaction. And then you add more, right? Later, however many more you need to do. But you keep the one you did. So yeah, they go together, right? Same thing. Kind of. Okay?
And this chart's on page 413, and then so it's the methodology for designing controls and substantive tests. It says each transaction cycle will likely be evaluated using a separate set of sub-audit programs, and then they give you a couple examples underneath the chart that is showing up on the screen right now.
So the procedure you want, the sample size, the items to select, and the timing of when you do it, in an interim date or after you're in, right? Interim would be before you're in. Okay? By the way, when you start doing it, when you start planning, you're writing a program is going to be really simple for me and on the CPA exam. Don't try to make it look like it's going to work, right? All you're going to do is for each one of the areas, you want to make sure that you satisfy each one of those audit objectives. So you write a program step for each one of the objectives. What are you going to do for completeness? What are you going to do for existence? And so on, right? So can you hit each one of those with a program step? And you'll probably have enough. Now, obviously, you can have multiple program steps to do each one of the objectives. But any audit program step is designed to attack at least one of the audit objectives. Got it? Collect evidence supporting whether or not they're doing right, supporting, refuting whether or not that balance is complete, exists, whatever. Got it? So tie those together. Tie your plan for your programs together with the audit objectives, and think about the types of evidence you collect, right? Sort of a grid, okay? And we'll have that as we go on. Okay.
And then a four-step approach to designing, control, and substantive tests. And then this starts on 413 and goes to the next page. Auditors follow a four-step approach to reduce, assess, control risk. The first is applying a transaction related audit objectives to the class of transactions being tested, such as sales. And then second is identifying key controls that should reduce control risk for each transaction-related audit objective. The third is develop appropriate test controls for all internal controls that are used to reduce the preliminary assessment of control risk below maximum. And then the fourth is for potential types of misstatements related to each transaction-related audit objective. Design appropriate substantive tests of transactions. Consider deficiencies in the internal control and expect the results of the test of control and stuff.
Notice on each area now, right? You're going to have tests of controls. You're going to have tests of transactions, right? And you're going to have tests of balances, right? Each area, okay? In each cycle. And notice you always have the procedure, sample size, which items to actually select. That's sample selection. And then the timing. Over and over and over. Every area of the audit. So both in test of control and in doing the substantive testing of balance, right? Test of transactions. It's kind of interesting to see. The tests of the controls and the test of the transactions go together on their chart. But really what's going to happen is the test of the transactions and the test of the ending balances, the substantive test, they're both substantive too. So those tests of transactions go both ways. Does that make any sense? Okay.
The methodology for designing tests of balances and accounts receivable. The PowerPoint, I would mark this page or this slide because the PowerPoint does have a really good notes section for the slide. It's like a half a page long, so I don't really want to read it. But it talks just about each step and goes into a little more detail because the book has, it's like a quick summary for each of the steps.
Where the book uses pages.
So.
Okay, so what do we do? Let's go back to that. What are we doing here? Identify client business risks affecting accounts receivable. And what could be wrong with accounts receivable? You know, if everybody is charged exactly the same price, and the computer is doing it, probably not very much problems with pricing. But if every price is negotiated, all of a sudden you need controls. You need a lot more control, different kind of controls, a lot more controls. Got the idea? So, you know, identify client business risks affecting accounts receivable. Just a simple one like that, huh? Okay? If you have one big, very stable, rich customer, it's different risk than if you have 1,000 little ones, some of them good and some of them not so good. By the way, the one really big one could be risky too, right? You lose that one customer, and you got a problem. It might even be a related party then. Anyway, set performance and materiality and assess inherent risk for accounts receivable. It all ties together. Can you make this stuff real instead of just being a chart and a bunch of words? You know, you really do things, so you need to get to that point. Assess control risk for sales and collection cycle. So what we're doing is we're assessing it before what? Before we test. Everybody got it? That's a preliminary assessment. In every area, this just happens to be sales and collections. Design and perform tests of controls and substantive tests of transactions, well, the starting of them, right? First time. Okay? Or the sales and collection cycle. So we're designing them and then we're performing those tests of controls, assuming the controls are testable. In a public company, you're going to test them no matter what. And then we design and perform analytical procedures for accounts receivable balance, and you may rely upon those more or less, right? depending on how good the controls are, and then design tests and details of accounts receivable balance to satisfy balance-related audit objectives. I'd say the test of transactions goes from from where the controls start all the way down to the bottom. It would really be all the way through that, okay? So it's kind of hard to write it. I sympathize with the author.
And this slide is on page 417. It's the approach to design test of details of balances and shows where everything is connected and going. How do you want me to?
Yeah. Be sure and read it. All of these flowcharts, read through them and just make sure they make sense to you. And I know you can go brain dead. They're repeating themselves a lot, aren't they?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So if you look at the first two columns, that's what we just looked at in the last slide, right? Or the one before that. You know, and so the right-hand side of this chart, the right-hand side there. Now we're going to apply balance-related audit objectives to each account balance. So what kind of things are we going to look at there? Audit-related objectives, that's back to existence, completeness, full disclosure, all that stuff, right? Proper disclosure. Okay. And so, yeah, so then that goes into the same thing for the tests and details of balances. But we got materiality judgments all the way through, right? Assessing the risk, okay? So, by the way, your scopes for materiality are going to determine your sample size too, right? Okay. What's a material error or not? Smaller your scope for materiality, larger your sample, right? For a particular account. Okay. That's enough.
Compare and contrast transaction-related audit objectives with balance-related presentation and disclosure-related audit objectives. So relationships of transaction-related audit objectives to balance-related audit. So it's 3-5, and it gives a general presentation of the relationships and illustrations that even with all transaction-related audit objectives are met, the auditor will still rely primarily on substantive tests of balances to meet the following balance-related audit objectives: realizable value and rights and obligations. And then so it shows your transaction-related audit objectives: occurrence, completeness, accuracy, posting and summarizing, classification, timing, and then your balance-related audit objectives.
That's where we left off with rights and obligation. I knew there was something. Rights and obligation. Right to what? You have the right to the asset, it's yours. Obligation, obviously, it's our obligation, liability, right? So they give some examples of some things that you might do, right?
So, relationship among 5 key evidence-related terms: the phase of the audit process, audit objectives, types of tests, evidence decisions, types of evidence. Alright, so now the phases of the audit process. 1. Plan and design an audit approach, perform tests of controls and substantive tests of transactions, perform analytical procedures and tests of details of balances, complete the audit and issue an audit report. For phase 1 at
They
the end.
just changed their order, didn't they? It's really tough. I would have said plan and design the audit approach, evaluate internal controls, test the controls, right? Then I'd do substantive tests of transactions, followed by probably analytic procedures and test the details of balances. Because you're going to do one or the other of those, or maybe some combination, maybe. But usually, if the controls are good and your substantive tests of transactions are working out well, right? Follow on from the controls, you can use analytic procedures. If the controls don't turn out very well, or the substantive test of transactions, you're finding a lot of mistakes. By the way, when you start finding a lot of mistakes, you're doing the substantive test of transactions. What did you just find out about the internal controls? No, not good. You might have tested it, and it was fine. Now you start doing a bunch of substantive tests of transactions, you find a whole bunch of mistakes. What do you think? The controls weren't good after all. So you can find that out, right? And you might have to increase the size of your sample then, okay, the scope of your audit. Anyway, so I would have put it in a little different order, but I put the other ones in a different order too, didn't I? You have to sort of get your head around this. Really, you do all of it at the same time. Do your planning first, design the audit first, But you can't decide the whole audit until after you've done your test of controls, can you? But you can't really come up with what your substantive tests are going to be until after you've tested. You can do a little sort of a preliminary program, knowing that if your test of controls come out differently, you're going to have to redo your plan for the substantive testing, and that's typically what we do. The senior writes the whole program first, and when you get into it, you modify it as you go forward. So, okay. And then complete and issue the audit report gathering.
And then I think they break them out on phase one. Okay, if they don't. All right, so at the end of phase one, the auditor should have a well-defined audit strategy and plan a specific audit program for the current audit. Phase two, obtain evidence in support of the specific controls that contribute to the auditor's assessed control risk, including integrated audits of internal controls over financial reporting, and then obtain evidence in support of the monetary correctness of transactions. And then for phase three, the two general categories of phase three are substantive analytical procedures that assess the overall reasonableness of transactions and balances, and then test of details of balances, which are audit procedures to test the monetary misstatements and the balances in the financial statements. And then phase four is like evidence and accumulate final evidence, and just perform final analytical procedures, evaluate the going concern assumption, obtain a client representation letter, read information in the annual report to make sure that it is consistent with the final or with the financial statements.
If you look at page 425, we do 1390, I guess, it goes through that.
Audit objectives, transaction related, balance related, presentation and disclosure related. Types of tests, risk assessment procedures, test controls, which this slide is already shown in the beginning, I believe.
Yeah. So,
Evidence decision, audit programs, exercise. Alright, so types of evidence, which we already feel like we already went over it. Observation, reperformance, recalculation, physical evidence, inspection, inquiries of the client, confirmation, and analytical procedures. Yeah, we went over that earlier.
be able to list those and discuss them, huh? Right? You may need them in every area, so just give us sort of boilerplate.
Integrate the 4 phases of the audit process. So phase 1, plan, design, and audit approach, perform test controls and substantive tests, transactions. Phase 3, perform analytical procedures and test the details of balances, complete the audit issue, which they just had a slide on.
Are they repeating themselves or what?
Yeah, so summary of the audit process. Phase 1.
This is better now. This is much better.
Accept client and perform initial planning.
Remember that you don't necessarily accept the client, right? You're not McDonald's. So you're checking out the client and, either you want to do business with them or not. So you check out their integrity, but, if you don't think they're doing the very best they can to get appropriate disclosures in the financial statements, right? Not trying to tell the truth, in other words, certainly you don't want anything to do with the client. It's bad enough if they're trying for fair disclosure, and you're trying to do good out of it. Both of you can still screw up, right? But if they're not trying to, if they're going the other direction, you're in trouble. We're not policemen, right? We're not trying to catch, unless you're doing fraud auditing, that's okay, right? Now you're trying to catch somebody. But imagine what your sample sizes are to do fraud auditing. You're looking for one exception. Oh man, just one. But if you find one, you've got it, right? One, situation where somebody invested, or one situation where they intentionally misstated the financial statements and you catch it. Now you sort of open the door, right? You can find all kinds of other things in a fraud audit. In this situation, we're just trying to see whether or not the financial statement is fairly presented, right? That's it. So it's a whole different world. And we think that they are trying to do that. So, but could their controls still screw up and they still have a material misstatement, right? Could our substantive procedures still miss things? Yeah, sure. Okay. So, all right.
Just understand the client's business and industry, assess client business risk, and perform preliminary analytical procedures.
What are you going to use all of this for? You're going to use it to plan the audit, of course, and determine what the scope of materiality might be, assess inherent risk, right? You know what business they're in. By the way, if I was going to do a compilation, which is no assurance, I'd still understand the client's business and industry. Otherwise, how can I read their financial statements? Which is really what a compilation is basically, supposedly, right? If I'm going to do a review where I'm giving limited assurance, negative assurance, but I am not going to give an audit opinion, I still am going to understand the client's business and industry, right? But for different purposes. Here, you're understanding it so you can start getting a preliminary assessment of internal controls. Okay? So business risk, of course, is part of inherent risk. Okay? Sure. The preliminary annual procedures to identify the areas where you need to emphasize in the audit, help with the scope of materiality. Sure.
More for phase one. Set materiality and assess acceptable audit risk and inherent risk, which is kind of what you just said. Understand internal control and assess control risk. Gather information to assess fraud risk and develop overall audit strategy and audit program.
This is just going through stuff we already covered in all the earlier chapters, right?
So phase two, plan to reduce, assess the level of control risk. Perform tests of controls, perform substantive tests of transactions, and assess likelihood of misstatements in financial statements.
Notice if they say yes, you go to perform tests of controls. If they say no, well, what kind of a client is it if you say no? If you can say no, I'm not going to rely on internal controls. That must be private. Okay. Public company, obviously, you're going to yes side. Okay. So, and you skip the test of controls, pretty obvious.
Phase three, low, medium, high, or unknown. Perform analytical procedures, perform tests of key items, and then perform additional tests of details and balances.
What is low, medium, and high mean? What's that?
Your level of risk.
Level of risk. Okay. And then therefore it's going to be your amount of, if it's low, what happens? Low risk. Small sample size. High risk. Large sample size. They're supposed to look at more. It's got more risk.
All right, so phase four, perform additional tests for presentation and disclosure, accumulate your final evidence, evaluate results, issue audit report, and communicate with the audit committee and management.
Which is required, right? And also just a wonderful idea. I do it in private. Student is public.
And then I guess that's...
So this stuff is going to apply in virtually every situation, I guess. Same thing. So, you got 15 minutes left. Want to do some questions?
Yes, that's what you do, I do.
There's a bunch of them, a few of them, on page 428. You can make them do them, right?
Yeah, well, we can...
Yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah.
I think so. That's a trick for them. But while you do these, seeing as we got a few minutes, let's first tell us what you think the answer is, and then tell us why. Go through the four responses and tell us why one's right and one's wrong. Really a good exercise when you're studying for the CPA exam. I'm serious. When you're studying for these exams, see why they think the other answers would be logical answers, and see if you can pull up the one you think makes sense. Okay. Chapter. Oh, you did pull it up. I'm sorry. 13. I just killed it. Okay. I just wanted to take the picture away from them so they don't know what the answers are. Anybody work these yet? Of course not. I'm a dreamer. 13 what? The first one is probably 22. Yep. We know the answers, you guys don't. Okay, so who wants to give one a shot? Give the first one a shot.
I'll try.
Go.
I would say the answer is 2, a test of control.
The auditor looks for an indication on duplicate sales invoices to see whether the accuracy of invoices is verified. What do you think that is?
This is the test of control.
Okay.
We're asking this.
You guys do know that before you look at the responses, you should do what? Read it, answer it, and then go to the stems, right? A, B, C, D, whatever, right? After you already formulated an answer. Did you do that?
Yeah.
Good. Okay, always do that, because what will happen otherwise?
We'll talk about others.
You'll choose one because they're all pretty close, a lot of times. They'll either give you 4 good responses or 4 awful ones, so if you have your own, sometimes you feel like you just let me write down the answer. So you knew that was the test control?
Yeah, because it says they're checking to see if it's verified.
Whether or not they did it. Why would it be verified? Well, that's one of their controls, isn't it? So does everybody agree on that? Is it a test of controls? Why is it not a test of details of balance?
At this point, you're not looking for balance.
There's no number,
Yeah.
even. How can it be a test of balances, right? Okay, a substantive test of transactions.
It's not one transaction. You're going through.
Yeah, you're looking for the authorization or is it verification after the fact? Is this monitoring or authorization? We can change to that too. They have those responses there. Looking for an indication of duplicate sales invoice to see whether the accuracy has been verified. What's that probably? It's probably a control. If it's the first time they did it, when they verified it, the invoice was correct. Your people are checking whether or not somebody billed you the right, or whether we billed the right amount out, right? Or could it be monitoring if it's after the fact? Yeah, so you can use the same questions for a variety of things. Okay. But both a test of control and a substantive test of transactions. And could it be that? If it was a test of a control, then it could obviously it could be a substantive test of transactions if the control was making sure the transaction was reported properly, right? So, does everybody agree with 2? Is that what the authors thought?
Yeah.
Okay, good. That's a good idea. Who wants to do B? Oh, come on, somebody jump in. All right. This is what you're going to do in meetings when you go to work, right? Sit there. Come on.
An auditor's decision needs.
Actually, probably was
by
good. Go ahead.
procedures.
I don't know.
It probably is what you're going to do when you go to work. It's what everybody does.
I'm gonna go with timing and test performed. I don't know why. Oh, it's big C.
Auditor's decision either to apply analytical procedures as substantive tests or to perform substantive tests as aggregation as transactions and account balances. What? Usually it's determined by what? What is this? I can use an analytical procedure, or I can test the transactions and account balances. Which is more expensive? Absolutely, testing the ending balance and testing the transactions. When could you rely upon the analytical procedure? I said it 100 times.
Internal controls.
When internal controls are strong and you're relying on the controls and you're comfortable doing less substantive
So
testing.
it'd be 2?
Which one did you pick? Which one did she pick, you guys?
I think the timing.
Timing, for God's sake.
Answer.
So if we were to formulate our answer, what would we say probably? The controls are really good, so I can reduce my substantive testing, use cheaper, weaker substantive tests. Analytic procedures are weak substantive tests, right? Compared to doing a confirmation or something. What answer did they like?
To the relative effectiveness and efficiency of the test.
How about that? Yeah. Test of what? Controls. Yeah. Okay, so, oh my, those other ones don't look very good. Okay, who wants to put their neck up the chopping block? There we go.
All right, so it says the auditor faces a risk that the audit will not detect material misstatements that occur in the accounting process. To minimize this risk, the auditor auditor relies primarily on. I have to go with substantive tests.
What do you guys think? The auditor faces a risk the audit will not detect material mistakes.
So
That's audit failure, right? If there are financial statement mistakes and you don't find them, that's audit failure, right?
Yeah.
And so we're talking about audit risk here. So you can reduce your audit risk, is that what you're saying? To minimize your audit risk, what you're going to do is you're going to do more substantive tests.
is it audit risk or detection?
No.
Planned detection risk?
The auditor will not detect them that occur. No, I guess it's detection risk, yeah. Which is not both, because you're reducing your audit risk by reducing your detection risk, right?
So
You're
you have
right, they
to
want to know how to reduce your detection risk. So, and they had testing controls in there, didn't they?
Yes.
What do testing controls relate to? Verifying that your estimate of control risk is correct. You're on the right direction, I think. So what are the possibilities here that you can do to reduce detection risk? You can do substantive procedures for the ending balances. You can do substantive procedures for testing controls, and you can do substantive procedures called analytic procedures, right? Because analytic procedures can be substantive procedures. So do they have all those there? No, they just have substantive tests. Testing controls will not work, right? Internal control? No, it's too late, right? You don't do that anyway. The client does the internal controls. You just evaluate them. Statistical analysis, we're going to do that for everything. That's how we're going to do our sample sizes. So is he right?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah. Okay. So the guys are smart and the girls aren't today. That's good. I like it. Okay. So that was funny. Imagine what would have happened if you were a freshman in a chief's report. Yeah, and pissed off, crying. Her mom would have been in my office yelling at me. Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't leave off.
I still regret it, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, sometimes.
All right, who wants to do D?
I'll do it. A conceptually logical approach to the auditor's evaluation of internal control consists of the following 4 steps. So I have to read them. I'm reading.
Everybody can read.
Okay. I'm going to say that it's number 4.
What'd you do, read ahead? You're going to do one? You're just bored with my discussion, I got it.
I'm going to say it's 4 because you have to know, like, what types can occur before you can do anything. Like,
Okay.
I mean, you can't.
So what
And that
should
was
the
the only
order
one that
be
started
if
with
the 4
number 4.
steps are performed? So you want to go
4.
with 4 first?
Yeah.
Oh, so it's already number 4.
Yeah. Well, that's why I picked 4.
Yeah.
It's the
This would
only
be
one
better
that
to have
starts
a
with
blank
4.
line and have you write them, but which is what I do. I
Or
like
at
to take,
least
you guys already know that, I like to take multiple choice questions and turn them into a fill-in. You've seen me do that in intermediate principles a lot, right? It's really fun. Yeah. So it makes it, you know, you can put down the answer you want. Yeah. Okay. So you think 4 should go forward? Consider the types of errors and fraud that can occur?
Yeah.
That'd be a good idea. You want to do that first?
Yeah.
What are the other ones? The first one says determining the internal controls that should prevent or detect errors and fraud.
Well, if you don't
Might be
know
a
what
good
can
idea.
occur, then you don't know what you're
Haven't
supposed to
done that.
do.
So you think that's second? That's what they
Well,
think.
according to what the answer is, yeah.
Yeah. I think it's probably.
The first one's 4, it has to be 1 next. It's the only other option.
All right. Number 3 says determine whether the necessary control procedures are prescribed and are being followed satisfactorily. If you don't know which ones you want, it would be kind of hard to determine whether or not they're following the ones you want. Okay, that's probably true, at least 2. Okay, so there's 3, right? And then what else do we have? 4, 1, 3,
Identify
and then 2.
control deficiencies.
Identify
Determine
control
their effect.
deficiency, determine their effect on the nature, timing, and extent of audit procedures. Because that's setting your level of substantive procedures, right? So these kind of help solidify the points, probably, and they're kind of easy. Okay, so who wants to know them? You want to do them? Yeah,
I didn't read ahead.
oh, well, we gave you one that's short, that's good, so. Did you just grab one? To support control risk below the maximum, you must indeed test the controls. Yes. Okay.
She says, I was reading that question.
It was a mistake, okay, yeah, three, absolutely. It's three, test the controls. It is three, isn't it?
It is three,
Yeah, okay,
yeah.
good, good, good. All right. Well, you gotta do another one, that's too easy. How about the? We'll do another one, D. That was good. Yeah,
I didn't even really do that one.
that was, I know you didn't, so we're gonna give you another one. Well, I don't think-
Lauren's got the good strategy, just picking three every time.
The primary objective of performing tests and controls. Why do you test controls? Not to obtain an understanding of them, you already have the understanding, you would know which ones you're testing. Not to do a preliminary evaluation because you've already done it. So what are you doing?
Number one,
You're testing them to what?
to assure that the internal controls are operating effectively, consistently.
Yes. You're testing to see whether or not they're actually following the controls, using them effectively. Yeah. So which one was that?
One.
Oh, the other one's ridiculous. Sufficient appropriate evidence. What's that? That would come from doing what? Substantive testing, right? To support the opinion. That's substantive. Assurances that informed and disclosed statements are reasonably adequate. What's that? Presentation and disclosure, right? Presentation and disclosure, substantive testing. Okay, how are you going to test controls for that? Okay? To knowledge and understand the client's prescribed procedures and methods, what's that? Obtaining an understanding of internal controls. Okay? And I guess you guys want to leave a minute early and sit in your last question? Just two more. Okay, C, what is it? To test the effectiveness of controls and other necessary selection of a variety of techniques, including what?
Three.
3D performance? Yeah,
I
that's
like it.
confirmation and comparison are all what?
I was reading that question.
Those are all what? Substantive procedures. You can't test controls with substantive procedures. Okay, and then what was D? Test controls are most likely to be admitted when what? You're never going to rely on the controls because they're crappy, so you don't test them in a private company. Is that answer there? They probably say
Well, it
crappy.
didn't say in a private company, but it's just. What?
Evaluating them is a waste of time, then 3?
Yep.
Okay. See you guys. See, you thought you weren't going to have any fun today. You should do these multiple choice questions.
Probably not. We've been doing that same thing. Hey, but I'm not sure.
I'm gonna go pick up my cap and gown.
I enjoy that.
And now I have to pay
Over and over.
I already paid
Isn't there something wrong with that? Shouldn't
They
we-
wanted my money like last week, because I hadn't
Shouldn't we
paid
just
yet.
shouldn't we rent one for you?
Yeah, it's not
And
stupid
just
to
include it in the tuition? Isn't it kind of a dissatisfier to have to pay for your cap and gown?
This is the one that I wore on convocation. It's probably paid for then as part-time education. Why should I have to be responsible for a gown?
I had to pay for mine in high school.
Well, because people like me wouldn't be responsible.
Exactly.
What's the point of buying it? Like, literally, you wear it every day and then you're.
My thing is, I don't mind buying it, but let my sisters come in behind me wear it.
Have you guys ever seen my cap and gown? It's got Oregon colors and stuff, you know?
Yeah, I like yours.
It costs a fortune. My wife went and bought that stupid thing. I was using the cheap ones you rent, you know, that you guys use. And then I rent a thing, you know, you put over the top. She went and bought this. She does the silliest things.
Do you have a cool hat too?
Oh, yeah.
Is it a belt?
Yeah.
No.
It's not a flat one. It's a little,
Yeah, you should get like a duck bill.
sort of like, what's the Harry Potter, the Harry Potter movies, you know, the little squishy hats they have?
Are you wearing it for graduation this year?
I always do.
That would be the only reason I'd want my doctorate was so if I ever went to a graduation.
I don't know if I want to go to this graduation because all they're going to talk about is Jay McGowan the whole time. Instead of listening to
But-
him talk, now we have to listen to people talk about it. Yeah.
At least it won't
But
be
you
big
can
from-
go because I'm gonna actually get to graduate.
I'll
So
be out there cheering.
that's a celebration in and
I'll
of
be
itself.
cheering that we're getting rid of you guys. Yeah, that's it.
Well, 4 years ago,
You're
this
here about
semester,
it.
4
Yay.
years ago, I didn't think it was gonna happen.
Yeah, really. Sure. See you later.